Hey everyone, and welcome to Theatre Macabre. Today we're going to be talking about the Old World role-playing game because I've actually been able to play it. Yes, last weekend I went to the UK Games Expo, headed down to the Cubicle 7 booth, and was fortunate enough to get some time to have a test game by one of their fabulous folks with a bunch of strangers, and we had a lot of chaotic fun. And that's the point. It was ridiculously fun. Now, you might be screaming at the telly, why do I need the Old World roleplay game? I've already got this fabulous book of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And I totally agree. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is amazing, but looking at the amount of tabs I've got in this book maybe explains what my only gripe with it is. It is very, very crunchy. But if you want to get on the table quickly and you want something in combat that's a bit more fast-paced, the Old World role-playing game, which is based in the 200 years previous timeline out of the new Warhammer Old World tabletop war game, then that is what you have got in this. The Warhammer the Old World role-playing game is a super fast-paced, more rules light D10 dice pool system compared to the D100 crunchy boy that is the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So what does that mean? Well, in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, I use a D100 for most of my stats. All of my stats have a usually 2-digit number attributed to them. In that, for example, let's take weapon skill. If I'm making an attack, I will have a weapon skill of, say, 35. And because it's a standard roll, I'd get a plus 20 to that, so it'd be a 55. I roll my 2d10s to make a D100, and I need to get under 55. How many, if I say roll a 45, I've done that by a whole 10, which means if you divide that by 10, that's a success level of 1. So I've succeeded, and I've done it with a success level of 1. My opponent would then have to roll against that, and they would determine their success levels. If I have more success levels, I effectively hit them. And as you can see, that requires quite a bit of mathematical work right there. You not only need to figure out what the stat is you need to get straight away, and then add these different modifiers, and then determine what the success levels is. In the Old World role-playing game, it is a D10 dice pool system. Now, I had the character Muntz. Muntz is a rat catcher. I was eager to grab this sheet to play first, and if I look at their stat sheet, it's already extremely different. Unlike in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, where you have weapon skill, ballistic skill, strength, toughness, intelligence, agility, dexterity, initiative, willpower, and fellowship, I've got a much slighter set of stats. I've got weapon skill, ballistic skill, strength, toughness, initiative, agility, reason, and fellowship. Now, for each of those stats, instead of having, say, a 35, a 45, or some sort of 2-digit number, I'm given a single-digit number, which actually returns into your dice pool for that stat. So if I take weapon skill again, I have a 3, which means I roll 3d10. Okay, but what do I need to be? Well, under each of those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stats, there are 2 sub-abilities, and those abilities are then given a number as well, which is a single digit, and you need to roll under that number with your dice pool to gain a success. So, with that weapon skill, I have 3d10 in my hand, I roll my 3d10. If I'm attacking, I use my melee ability, which has a 5. I need to get under 5 to gain a success. So I roll 3d10, let's say I get a 3, a 2, and a 6, I've succeeded twice. And there you have it. It's simple as that, I just need to roll those. If I'm in melee combat, my opponent will equally roll their defense. So if it was mine, I'm going to use my numbers. I have a 3, I roll my 3d10, they roll their 3d10. If they get under 3 more times than I got under 5, so if they got 1 success and I had 2 successes, I effectively win the melee combat round and hit them and do damage. And it's great. It really is. That very small different change is so much more quicker paced and so much easier just to visually understand what's going on in front of you. And that's the thing, it's that visual ease of seeing 3 dice, seeing which ones are succeeding, and then being able to just easily determine that without having to calculate how many success levels, etc., etc. On top of that, combat is generally easier. In Woofrup, if I made an attack, I would roll, say, a 54. I would then reverse that to make it a 45, and that would determine the hit location I have done and the injury that might in turn come from me wounding them. And wounding and injuries become so much more complex. However, in the Old World role-playing game, It is a delight, because all you do is once you've made your attack, you see how many successes you've made, and then by that number of successes, you add that number of successes onto the damage type. So for example, let's go back to Muntz. Muntz has a dagger. The dagger does 2 plus whatever my success is. So say I get 2 successes, I've then got 2 plus, which makes it 4 damage. I will do 4 damage in this hit. Then the opponent player or the monster you're looking at on their stat sheet, they'll have a number called resilience. Now, the resilience number means how much damage needs to happen in a single attack to cause an injury. And this is kind of cool. You do not have hit points. There are none of the hit points on this page. And I quite like it. This is actually mind-blowingly cool. And I can't really explain in more easy terms than how this works. Because say I get hit with 5, I then have to go to the injury table. On the injury table, I roll a d10, and that determines what injury I take. I didn't get to keep the injury table, so I can't recall exactly all of it. But what was great about this is that you just slowly accumulate injuries. Now, as you accumulate injuries and as you accumulate damage, you slowly go up the table in your dice rolls. And as you go up the chart, you realize that it slowly and more likely becomes death. And I kind of love that vibe because it talks so much about the grim, dark hellhole that is the Warhammer world. And it's so much easier to manage. The love of not having a hit points and just accumulating injuries feels so much less gamified, actually, because there's something very strange about the fact that you have hit points. I find it very weird in D&D when you're a wizard and you only start off with, say, like maybe 4 hit points, and a cat can slash you and you could die instantly. Just kind of seems a little bit, it's just a bit weird. It's kind of a weird concept that we all buy into when we play these games. But having this ability, like I have a certain level of resilience, I need to have a certain amount of damage done to me to get past whatever armor I may be wearing or whatever I have like constitutionally about me, that then I get injured. It's a really nice system. I love it. It works so well for this. Now, that's accumulating injuries and the lack of hit points. The other interesting thing is that returns, and people may be wondering, is what happened to the old school fate and resilience? Resilience meant a different thing. It was more like a willpower check. Well, they've got rid of what we used to have as resilience, but they have now fate still, and fate works in a much more streamlined and covers both of those bases, where you can use fate points. My character had 3, and in those 3 points, I have the ability to shrug off an attack, or shrug off an effect, or gain some hit points back. I didn't get to see the whole list, but I used it in the game. When I failed a roll, I could use a fate point to re-roll it to make sure it succeeds. And I think it's a much more simple, very much like the omens in Morkborg or other sort of luck points that you have in similar games. And I quite like that. And it's a much less complicated, more wide-ranging, very easy to understand rule for the game. And then advantage and disadvantage I haven't talked about. So there is a different form of that. Rather than in advantage and disadvantage where you would roll twice and take the best result, what happens in this is with my dice pool, if I have advantage, I roll my dice. Out of, let's say I roll 4 dice and 2 succeed, I get to re-roll the ones that fail to see if they succeed. However, if I have disadvantage, say I roll and I've got 2 successes, I only re-roll the successes to see if they then fail. And it's quite simple, again, fits in quite well. There are also different ways that you can gain additional dice to your dice pool. For example, Muntz here has a +1 dice if I am concealing the dagger. So if I have my dagger, I usually use 3 dice for my melee attack, but if I've got it concealed and I sneakily slide up to you, I get an additional dice. And that's quite fun. Additionally, I have a +1 dice to defend when being charged. That's just if I'm holding my spear, which is kind of cool. And you gain different things like +1 damage if you're using the spear 2-handed instead of 1-handed. So it shows the adaptability of a very simple system. And as I said, on many systems, if you get it right, having very streamlined, simple systems allows for much adaptability. And I think that's what's kind of great, and I'm seeing in this, and I'm very excited for it. And so really, there's not much more to say about my experience than to reiterate how much fun it was. Just how much more streamlined the combat was without giving up the feel and the sentiment and the vibe that you have from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I feel that these coexist in the world in a similar vein to each other in a really great way. It feels like old school advanced D&D to basic D&D, and maybe more companies should do this, and using this opportunity as they are to make a new role-playing system in a similar setting, but taking that opportunity to not just make it, oh, well, it's just the same game, we've just got a different setting. They've actually taken the opportunity to think, no, how could we look at adapting Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay into a different type of game without, must I reiterate, without losing the essence of what is Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay gameplay. And that's what's great about it. They've kept everything you know from it, but just filtered out the sort of crunch to allow people this opportunity to take one or the other, depending on how you want to play. But before I go, just want to say I will be coming back to do a full review of this when I get my review copy, which is supposedly coming very soon. So if you do want to hear that, then you can click the subscribe button, click that bell for notifications, and you won't be able to miss it. But until then, I have been so glad to welcome you to Theatre Macabre, and until next time, you take care in the Underhive. Bye everyone.